Are you ready to learn about object relative clauses? I'm ready if you are. And if you're not, then stop the video and come back later when you're ready to start the next type. Okay, let's go. Object relative clauses. Yay! Just like the subject relative clauses, you can put the object relative clauses either after the main clause or within the main clause. Let's have a look. As you know, both subjects and objects are nouns or pronouns. The difference is that subjects are the ones doing the action or being the thing we're talking about, and the object is the receiver of the action. Here you can see an example. She's the doctor. You saw her last week. We can shorten this to she is the doctor who you saw last week. Her is who you saw. So in this sentence, she is the subject and who you saw last week is the object. That is who you saw. One more. The car is silver, he bought it. So we can say the car that he bought is silver. So here you can see that we can put these object relative clauses either after the main clause or inside the main clause. It works fine either way. Let's have a look at the rules. Rule number 1. A sentence with a relative clause combines two sentences or ideas. In an object relative clause, the relative pronoun is the object of the clause. Those pronouns are that, which, who, and whom. Following the relative pronoun is a subject and a verb. For example, we can say, the woman is Korean, you met her. Or we can say, the woman that you met is Korean. That you met is the object relative clause because it tells you which woman is Korean. The main clause here is the woman is Korean. By adding the relative clause, you're describing which woman we're talking about. Does that make sense? Let's look at rule number 2. Use who, whom, or that for people, and that or which for places, things, and animals. We can say, that is the boy who you met last week, or that is the boy whom you met last week, or that is the boy that you met last week. They're all good. And you can say, the book that I'm reading now is very good. Or you can say, the book which I'm reading now is very good. Really, most people would say that, but it's your choice. Rule number 3. The subject and verb in an object relative clause must agree, just like in a subject relative clause. You always have to make the subject and verb agree. For example, I like the work that he does, or I like the work that they do. Okay, last rule. Rule number 4. Do not repeat the object in an object relative clause. So we can say, she has a job that she loves, but we can't say, she has a job that she loves it. That just sounds really weird, and it's incorrect. There's one more thing I want to tell you about object relative clauses, and that is that we sometimes use them without using the relative pronouns. Here's what that looks like. I have two sentences here without the relative pronouns. The people I met were friendly. We could have said the people that I met or who I met were friendly, but I don't really have to say that. You can leave out the relative pronoun and it still makes sense. The people I met were friendly. That works just fine. The other sentence is, the movie we saw won an award. Just like before, we could say the movie that I saw won an award, but why say more than we need to? We can say this sentence without the pronoun. Here are the rules for this. Rule number 1. The object relative pronoun, whether it's that, which, who, or whom, is often omitted, which means it's left out or not used, from object relative clauses. So we have a choice. We can say, she's wearing a ring that I like, or we can say, she's wearing a ring I like. Usually we'll say it without the relative pronoun. Rule number 2. Don't forget, you can't omit the subject relative pronoun, whether it's that, which, or who. So we can say, I know a man who owns 10 cars, but we can't say, I know a man owns 10 cars. Actually, the sentence is correct, but it doesn't mean the same thing as I know a man who owns 10 cars. It means I know that somewhere in the world there's a man who owns 10 cars, but I don't know who that is. See the difference? Okay, there's one more type of relative clause that I'm going to talk about today. It's object relative clauses with prepositions. Here's what those look like. Did you find the book that, or which, or no pronoun at all, you were looking for? As you can see, this sentence or question ends with the preposition for. Some people say you must never end a sentence in English with a preposition. That's not true. In some cases, we can. And the other sentence is, the man that, or who, or whom, or no pronoun at all, she spoke with is my boss. There you go. That's what they look like. You know what's next? Yes, the rules. Rule number 1. A relative pronoun, that is, that, which, who, or whom, can be the object of a preposition. The preposition usually comes after the verb in an object relative clause. For example, the people were clients. I met with them. Becomes, the people that I met with were clients. Notice that the preposition comes after the verb. Rule number 2. Don't forget this one. The object relative pronoun is often omitted or left out in conversation and informal writing. The people who I met with were clients is correct, but we can say the people I met with were clients, or the book that I'm looking for is red, or we can more easily say the book I'm looking for is red. They're both fine, unless you're being very formal. That takes me to the next rule, rule number 3. In formal English, the preposition can come at the beginning of the object relative clause before whom for people or which for things. This is one that we rarely see in California because we're pretty informal here. But you can see this in very formal situations. It looks like this. The person to whom we spoke was helpful. Or the job for which I applied was new. Does that sound awkward to you? It does to me, but it is correct, and sometimes you might see this written or hear it spoken. Rule number 4. Do not use a preposition before who or that. Do you know why? It's because we don't use a preposition after a subject pronoun, and who and that are subject pronouns. It's like the difference between I and me. We have different pronouns for subjects and objects. So we can say, the person to whom I spoke was helpful, but we can't say, the person to who I spoke was helpful. But we can use a preposition before which. So we can say, the job for which I applied was new, but we can't say, the job for that I applied was new. You'd have to say the job I applied for was new. Now, what about relative clauses with whose? Do you know about these? Well, you will. This time, I'm going to jump right into the rules. Rule number 1. Use whose plus a noun at the beginning of a relative clause to show possession. Whose replaces a possessive adjective or a possessive noun like his, her, their, its, Sam's, and so on. Whose plus a noun can be the subject or the object of a relative clause. For example, the author writes beautifully. Her book won an award. That can become the author whose book won an award writes beautifully. Or we can say, she's the author, I just bought her book. But we could shorten it to, she's the author whose book I just bought. You can see here that the first sentence has a subject relative clause, and the second one has an object relative clause. Can you see the difference? I hope so. Rule number 2. Whose can be used for people, places, animals, and things, and a noun always follows whose. Let's look at examples. That's the coffee shop. We love its lattes. Or,
That's the coffee shop whose lattes we love. This time we have an object relative clause. Rule number 3. Whose often comes after someone, anyone, no one, and everyone. Like this. She is someone whose work interests me. Or, I don't know anyone whose work involves travel. Rule number 4. Remember this. Do not repeat the subject or object in the relative clause. This means we can say, she is the artist whose paintings are in the gallery, but we can't say, she is the artist whose paintings they are in the gallery. We just don't repeat the subject or object using a pronoun like this. And we can say, the artist whose painting I bought is from Russia, but we can't say, the artist whose painting I bought, it is from Russia.
And that concludes my lesson on relative clauses. I had put a written lesson up a while back, and I'll keep it up on my website. It's always good to have more than one resource. If one confuses you, you always have another explanation. I'm Alex Olinger from Alex's ESL World, and that's it for today. Remember to be kind to each other. We are all humans on this earth. Take care, and I'll see you next time.